Most people know Hazrat Moosa, Moses, peace be upon him, as the one who parted the sea, who confronted Pharaoh, and who led an entire nation to freedom. But long before the miracles and the victories, there was a man who was afraid, uncertain, and deeply conflicted about who he was and what he was meant to do. That's the part of his story many overlook, the internal journey from fear to faith. And yet, it is the most powerful transformation of all, because it's the one that mirrors our own lives more than anything else. Fear is universal. It comes in many forms: fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of responsibility. Hazrat Moosa experienced all of these when he was called to face the Pharaoh, the very symbol of power, oppression, and danger. His first reaction wasn't boldness. It wasn't certainty, it was fear. He said, "My Lord, I fear that they will reject me." He even expressed concern about his speech, about not being eloquent, and asked for his brother to be brought alongside him to support him. These aren't the words of a fearless warrior. These are the confessions of a man who felt unqualified, unworthy, and unready. And that is precisely what makes his story so profoundly inspiring, because Hazrat Moosa was chosen not because he had no fear, but because he was willing to move despite it. The transformation didn't happen all at once. There was no sudden download of courage. It was gradual. It was a process. He grew into his purpose. He stepped into his calling, one act at a time. Every time he confronted Pharaoh, every time he stood in front of the people and delivered the message, he was becoming more of the leader he was meant to be. It was as though his faith was expanding in direct proportion to the resistance he encountered. That's how faith works. It doesn't come fully assembled. It grows as you take steps forward. Fear, on the other hand, loves inertia. It thrives when you stand still, when you hide, when you convince yourself you're not ready. But Hazrat Moosa refused to let fear stop him forever. Yes, he hesitated. Yes, he questioned. But then he acted. And once he acted, the fear began to lose its grip. This is a universal principle that applies to every person who has ever wanted to grow, lead, or change something in their life. Most people wait to be free from fear before they take action. But Hazrat Moosa's life teaches us that freedom from fear comes after taking action, not before. Fear is not an obstacle to your calling. It's a signal that you are approaching something meaningful. If you feel afraid, uncertain, or unqualified, you are in good company. So did one of the greatest prophets of all time. But here's the secret. He didn't let it define him. He chose to listen to a voice higher than his own doubt. He trusted in something beyond his limitation, and that faith, that inner trust, is what reshaped not only his destiny, but the destiny of an entire people. Hazrat Moosa was not born into a life of leadership. He was born into danger. From the moment he entered the world, there was a threat to his life. He was placed in a basket and set afloat on a river. That river carried him to a place he didn't choose. A palace of privilege, yes, but also a place of deep contradiction. He was raised in Pharaoh's household, yet his heart belonged to the oppressed. He knew he was different. That tension within him, between comfort and truth, between silence and justice, became unbearable when he saw injustice firsthand. He reacted. He made a mistake. He fled. And in that wilderness, away from the palace, away from power, away from identity, he was being prepared. Fear has a strange way of showing up strongest right before your breakthrough. When Hazrat Moosa was called back to Egypt, he was being asked to return to the very place he had run from. Can you imagine that, being told to go back to the place of your greatest failure to face the most powerful man in the world with nothing but your belief in a mission? That's not just courage, that's transformation. He didn't feel ready, he didn't feel capable, but he answered the call anyway. That's what separates those who change the world from those who stay stuck in it. The moment he stood in front of Pharaoh wasn't just a confrontation between two men. It was a confrontation between fear and faith, between doubt and destiny. And with every sign he showed, every time he stood his ground, he wasn't just delivering a message. He was stepping further and further into his own strength. This wasn't just about freeing a nation. It was about freeing himself from fear, from hesitation, from the belief that he wasn't enough. His life is proof that fear is not a final destination. It's a doorway, and every time you walk through it, you discover that what you feared had no real power over you at all. The only power fear ever has is the power we give it. Hazrat Moosa reclaimed that power. He chose to believe not in the voice of fear, but in the voice that told him he was chosen, he was capable, and he was never alone. The beauty of Hazrat Moosa's journey is not just in the outcome, it's in the process. The internal war, the wrestling with doubt, the quiet moments of pleading for help, because that's where real transformation takes place. Not when the sea parts, but when a man says yes, even with a trembling voice, when he stands up even when his knees are shaking, when he moves forward even when the path is uncertain. That is where the shift happens. That is where the impossible becomes possible, not outside of us, but within. Hazrat Moosa's story is not just ancient history. It's a mirror, a reminder that fear does not disqualify us. It prepares us, it sharpens our vision, it calls out the deeper strength within us, and when we stop waiting to feel brave and start acting with faith, we begin to rise. We begin to lead. We begin to step into the reason we were born. Purpose is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. It can lift a person from the shadows of obscurity and place them at the forefront of transformation. In the story of Hazrat Moosa, peace be upon him, purpose wasn't handed to him with clarity from the very beginning. It was something that revealed itself through the twists and turns of his life, and when it finally came into view, it demanded everything from him: his comfort, his doubts, his fears, his identity. But once he aligned with that purpose, nothing in the world could stand in his way. Not the might of Pharaoh, not the disbelief of his people, not even the vast, endless desert. Because purpose is not just a feeling, it's a fire. And when it is lit inside someone, that fire can illuminate paths through the darkest uncertainty. Hazrat Moosa grew up in Pharaoh's palace, an environment of luxury and power, but also of injustice and cruelty. He was raised in the very system that was oppressing his own people. That inner conflict, the tension between where he lived and who he truly was, grew inside him. Purpose often begins like that, as discomfort, as a restlessness you can't ignore. You don't always get a roadmap or a clear voice from the sky. Sometimes it starts with a disturbance in your spirit, something you can't explain but you know is real. Hazrat Moosa experienced that when he saw one of his own being oppressed and stepped in, acting on impulse. It wasn't a perfect action. In fact, it led to him fleeing into exile, but even in that moment, purpose was shaping him. It was forcing him to leave behind the identity he was given to discover the one he was born with. Years passed in the wilderness. While others may have seen that time as a period of exile or punishment, it was actually a time of preparation. Purpose doesn't rush, it doesn't need to. It waits until you are stripped of the noise, the distractions, the attachments. And in the stillness of that solitude, something powerful happens. You begin to hear the deeper call. When Hazrat Moosa encountered the burning bush, it wasn't just a supernatural moment. It was the unveiling of the assignment that had always been meant for him. That voice didn't just tell him what to do. It awakened who he truly was. You see, purpose has a way of calling out your potential even when you don't see it yourself. When he was told to return to Egypt and confront Pharaoh, Hazrat Moosa didn't jump up in excitement. He hesitated, he doubted, he questioned whether he had what it took. That's normal. Purpose isn't always comfortable. In fact, the size of the resistance you feel is often a measure of the size of your calling. He expressed his limitations openly. He spoke of his fears, his speech, his past, and yet the call remained the same, because purpose doesn't depend on your perfection. It depends on your willingness. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to say yes. That yes may be shaky, it may be quiet, but it's enough to move mountains when it's aligned with something higher than your ego. Once Hazrat Moosa accepted that call, he was no longer just a man who had run from Egypt. He was the one who would return with authority, the one who would confront the system that shaped him and declare freedom in the face of oppression. That kind of boldness doesn't come from personality, it comes from purpose. And when he walked back into Egypt, he wasn't relying on his past or his reputation or his power. He was walking in alignment with something far greater. That's why his words carried weight. That's why his actions created waves. Because when you are moving in your purpose, even the most powerful forces must pay attention. It's easy to forget that the same people Hazrat Moosa was sent to help were the same people who doubted him. They questioned his intentions. They challenged his authority. They turned on him in moments of fear. And yet he continued. Why? Because purpose doesn't depend on approval. It's not sustained by applause. It's fueled by conviction. Hazrat Moosa wasn't working for popularity. He was working for a vision that transcended personal comfort. That's what true leadership looks like. Not the absence of criticism, but the persistence of mission. Even in the wilderness, when people lost faith, when complaints were louder than gratitude, he kept going. Because once you see the promised land in your spirit, you can't unsee it. The world may look barren, the journey may feel long, but purpose keeps your feet moving. Even the miracles he performed weren't for show. They were expressions of alignment. When he threw down his staff and it turned into a serpent, or when he split the sea, those moments weren't about spectacle. They were about obedience to a higher assignment. The power didn't come from him. It flowed through him. That's the difference. When you are in your purpose, you become a vessel. You're not operating out of ego. You're operating out of trust. And that kind of trust is unshakable. It allows you to stand before giants without flinching. It gives you words when you thought you had none. It lifts your voice above the noise of doubt and fear. It makes you do things that your former self would never believe possible. There's a reason Hazrat Moosa is remembered not just as a prophet, but as a liberator, because he embodied what happens when a human being becomes fully aligned with their divine purpose. He showed that you don't need to be perfect, eloquent, or fearless to lead. You just need to be willing. Willing to say yes. Willing to carry the burden, willing to walk even when you can't see the end. That willingness created waves of change that echoed across generations. And it all began with that inner fire, the one that says, "This is what I was made for." There is a certain rhythm to life that we often try to resist. In a world where people chase speed, instant results, and overnight transformations, The story of Hazrat Moosa, peace be upon him, stands as a timeless reminder that true greatness takes time. His journey wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. It was layered with delay, isolation, waiting, and repeated trials. But none of that was wasted. Every moment of waiting, every year spent in the wilderness, every setback, every test, it all served a purpose. Divine timing is not about convenience. It is about alignment. It is about preparation. It is about growth that happens in silence, in the background, long before the stage is set and the mission begins. Hazrat Moosa's story reveals that when life seems to be on pause, when nothing makes sense, that is often when the most meaningful transformation is happening. Before he became a prophet, before he stood before Pharaoh, before he became the voice of freedom, Hazrat Moosa lived through years of waiting. From the time he left Egypt after the incident with the Egyptian man, he spent decades in a land not his own, tending sheep in the solitude of the desert. On the surface, that period might look like stagnation. To an outsider, it might seem like he had fallen from royalty to irrelevance. But in reality, he was in divine training. He was being stripped of the palace, the identity given to him by the system of power, and slowly being reintroduced to his true self. The desert was his university. The silence was his classroom. This is where the impatience of the modern world clashes with divine wisdom. We think waiting is wasted time, but waiting is often the season where the soul is deepened and the character is built. Hazrat Moosa wasn't ready to confront Pharaoh the day he ran from Egypt. He was reactive. He was conflicted. He didn't yet have the clarity or the inner structure to hold the weight of the mission. That's why the time in Midian mattered so much. Because the mission ahead required more than fire and rage. It required calm, vision, and endurance. It required someone who could hold the burden of leading not just himself, but an entire nation. That kind of leadership isn't born in palaces. It is forged in obscurity. It's built in the places no one sees, in the long days where nothing seems to be happening, in the repetition of ordinary tasks, in the consistency of showing up even when there is no reward yet. That's the training that produces someone who can carry the mantle of purpose. So often, people feel discouraged because their breakthrough hasn't come yet. They think the delay means they were forgotten, but the story of Hazrat Moosa tells a different narrative. It teaches that delay is not denial. It teaches that the longer the preparation, the greater the mission. Sometimes, the deeper the silence, the louder the eventual impact. The world may not see what is happening behind the scenes, but that doesn't mean nothing is happening. Seeds don't grow the moment they're planted. They push through darkness before they reach the surface. That's what Hazrat Moosa was doing in those years, growing roots. And without deep roots, no tree can weather the storms to come. When the divine call finally came, when the voice spoke to him from the burning bush, it was not a random moment. It was a precise alignment. It was the intersection of readiness and calling. He may not have felt ready. He may have still carried hesitation. But in the grand design, he was exactly where he needed to be. At the exact moment he needed to be there. Divine timing works like that. It doesn't always align with human logic, but it always aligns with purpose. And when you step into something that's been timed beyond your understanding, you begin to see doors open that you never could have forced open yourself. Even after accepting the mission, Hazrat Moosa's journey was not a straight line. There were more delays. There were moments when the people he was trying to help turned against him. There were long stretches in the wilderness with no clear end in sight. Yet again, we see that waiting isn't just something that happens before the journey begins. It's something that continues throughout the process. Faith is not tested in the first step. It is tested in the 10th, the 100th, when you've already come far, but the destination is still not visible. That's where most people give up, but Hazrat Moosa didn't, because he understood that patience was not just a virtue. It was the strategy. It was a weapon. It was how he stayed aligned when everything outside of him looked uncertain. There is a sacredness to divine timing that protects you from things you're not ready for. If Hazrat Moosa had confronted Pharaoh too soon, without the preparation, without the growth, it could have broken him. The delay was protection. The waiting was mercy. The wilderness wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Sometimes the most powerful moments in your life are the ones where nothing appears to be happening, because beneath that stillness, everything is shifting. Your character is forming. Your strength is developing. Your vision is sharpening. You are becoming someone who can handle the weight of the promise. Hazrat Moosa's patience wasn't passive. It wasn't the kind of waiting that complains and loses faith. It was active. It was grounded in trust. Even when the people around him panicked, even when they doubted, even when they begged to go back to slavery because freedom seemed too difficult, he kept moving forward. That's the kind of patience that changes history. The patience that is rooted in purpose, not comfort. The kind that knows delay is part of the process. The kind that understands some of the most important things in life take time. Time to grow, time to heal, time to reveal. In the story of Hazrat Moosa, time was never wasted. Every chapter was necessary. Every pause had purpose. Every delay held wisdom. And for those who feel like life is moving too slowly, for those who feel like they've been stuck in the desert for too long, this story echoes through time as a reminder that divine timing doesn't follow the clock on your wall. It follows the growth of your soul, the expansion of your faith, and the quiet unfolding of a plan far greater than anything you could imagine. Leadership is often mistaken for position or power, but the life of Hazrat Moosa, peace be upon him, shows something entirely different. His leadership was not born in a palace, though he grew up in one. It wasn't based on titles, though he was given many. It was formed through adversity, shaped in hardship, and refined in the heat of responsibility. He wasn't a leader because he wanted authority. He was a leader because he was willing to carry the weight that others could not. He stood at the front of a nation that was broken, doubtful, and lost. He didn't just have to lead them out of Egypt. He had to lead them out of a mindset shaped by generations of slavery. That's not something power alone can do. That takes vision, conviction, and a kind of strength that most people only discover through trial. Hazrat Moosa didn't volunteer to become the face of a revolution. He didn't seek influence or popularity. In fact, when he was called to lead, his first instinct was to resist. He didn't think he had the right words, the right qualifications, or the right strength. And that's what made him the perfect choice. Because true leaders are not driven by ego. They are driven by responsibility. They are aware of their flaws, and that awareness keeps them humble. But they also know that the mission is bigger than their insecurity. Hazrat Moosa could have let his fear define him. He could have walked away, but he chose to step into the fire. That decision, made in private, made with trembling, became the foundation of leadership that would guide a nation through the harshest conditions imaginable. One of the most powerful aspects of his leadership was his endurance. Time and time again, the people he led questioned him, challenged him, doubted him. They complained, they lost patience, they rebelled, and yet he stayed committed to the vision. He didn't abandon them. He didn't turn back. Because leadership is not about how people treat you, it's about how you respond when the pressure increases. It's about standing your ground when everything feels like it's falling apart. Hazrat Moosa didn't always get applause. He wasn't always celebrated. Often he stood alone, but even in isolation he carried the vision forward. That's something every great leader learns. Adversity doesn't disqualify you, it defines you. In fact, the greater the responsibility, the greater the resistance. Leading people who are broken, afraid, or conditioned to think small is one of the hardest tasks in the world. It's not just about giving commands, it's about pulling people out of mental chains. That's what Hazrat Moosa did. The real exodus didn't just happen at the sea. It happened in their minds. He was leading them away from the habits of slavery, from dependency, from fear, from doubt. That's the deeper layer of leadership. It's not just logistical, it's psychological, it's emotional. And it requires patience at a level most people never talk about. When people romanticize leadership, they often forget the cost. They forget the lonely nights, the constant decision making, the burden of knowing that others are looking to you for guidance even when you feel unsure yourself. Hazrat Moosa carried all of that, and he didn't carry it with arrogance. He carried it with sincerity. He spoke with his Creator. He sought guidance. He asked for help. Because true leaders don't pretend to know everything. They stay connected to the source of wisdom. That connection is what allowed him to lead with clarity in moments of chaos. When the sea stood before them and Pharaoh's army was behind them, the people panicked, but Hazrat Moosa stood still, trusting in something they could not yet see. That is the kind of leadership that creates breakthroughs not through force, but through faith. And even in the moments when he became frustrated, when the people tested his limits, he didn't give up on them. He interceded for them. He prayed for them. He stood between them and divine justice, asking for mercy. That's not just leadership. It's sacrifice. It's love. It's the willingness to bear a burden that others don't even understand. There were times he was exhausted, times when he asked his Lord for relief, but still he pressed on, because he wasn't in it for himself. He was in it for the mission. And when the mission becomes more important than the ego, something extraordinary happens. You stop reacting to every criticism and start responding to a higher calling. Hazrat Moosa didn't lead with manipulation or fear. He led with purpose. Even when the people built a golden calf and betrayed the very truth he had taught them, he didn't abandon the vision. He confronted them, corrected them, but ultimately he brought them back. That takes more than strength. It takes compassion. And that combination of firmness and mercy is rare. Most people lean too far in one direction. They either become too harsh or too lenient. But true leadership lives in the balance. It knows when to be soft and when to be strong. It knows when to wait and when to act. It doesn't panic under pressure. It stands firm even when the crowd wavers. Leadership through adversity is not glamorous. It's not about titles or recognition. It's about staying anchored to your principles in a world that's constantly shifting. Hazrat Moosa did that with grace, with struggle, with real human emotion. He wasn't perfect, but he was faithful. And through every setback, every complaint, every delay, he kept guiding his people towards something better. That's what made him not just a prophet, but a transformational leader. He didn't just change the direction of a nation. He changed its identity. He took a people who had been conditioned to obey out of fear and taught them to live with dignity. He showed them through his own example that freedom is not just a destination. It is a mindset, a commitment, and a responsibility that must be protected and carried forward, no matter how difficult the road becomes. Freedom is often thought of as something external, a change in circumstances, a shift in environment, a release from physical bondage. But the story of Hazrat Moosa, peace be upon him, teaches something much deeper. It teaches that true freedom begins in the mind. You can be pulled out of slavery, but if your thoughts are still chained, you are not truly free. Hazrat Moosa was not just tasked with leading a nation out of Egypt. He was called to lead them out of generations of mental captivity. That's what made his mission so immense. It wasn't just about geography. It was about psychology. He had to help people unlearn the lies they had been told about who they were, what they were worth, and what was possible for them. That's the real battle, and it's the same battle people are still fighting today. Not against a pharaoh, but against the inner voices that say, you can't, you're not enough. Stay where it's safe. Don't believe in more. The Israelites had been under the grip of oppression for so long that even when they were physically free, they struggled to think like free people. That's the power of conditioning. It doesn't just hold your body, it shapes your mind. It makes you fear freedom because freedom requires responsibility. It makes you crave the familiar even when the familiar is painful. Hazrat Moosa had to lead people who were conditioned to follow orders, not vision. They were used to being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it. So when they were given the opportunity to walk in a new way, they didn't know how. And that fear of the unknown made them question everything, even the path that was designed to elevate them. This is why mental liberation is harder than physical liberation. You can change a situation quickly, but changing the mindset that has been reinforced for decades, that takes deep, patient, persistent work. Hazrat Moosa understood this. He knew that unless their thinking changed, their future would look exactly like their past. That's why he didn't just lead them out, he taught them, he guided them. He reminded them of who they truly were. He showed them that they were not defined by Pharaoh's chains, but by the promise placed within them. That shift from victimhood to purpose is the very foundation of inner freedom, and without it, no amount of external change can lead to lasting transformation. Even when miracles happened before their eyes, even when the sea parted and the enemy was destroyed, the mindset of slavery lingered. The people still complained, they still doubted, they still longed to go back. That's not because they were ungrateful, it's because their inner programming hadn't been rewritten yet. And that's a reflection of what many people experience in life. You can get a new job, a new relationship, a new opportunity. But if your mind is still stuck in fear, in lack, in the belief that you are powerless, you will sabotage your own progress. That's why Hazrat Moosa's work was so difficult. He wasn't just leading bodies. He was leading minds and hearts. He was fighting against an internalized narrative that said, we are slaves, and that is all we will ever be. He didn't fight this battle with weapons. He fought it with truth. With reminders, with patience, he taught them about their Creator, about their identity, about the higher purpose they were created for. And every lesson, every law, every step forward was meant to replace the old programming with a new belief, that they were chosen, that they were capable, that they were meant for more. That is the essence of true leadership, to replace limiting beliefs with liberating truths. And yet, not everyone accepted it right away, because freedom is scary when you've never had it. It forces you to confront yourself. It exposes your excuses. It demands that you rise to meet your own potential. Hazrat Moosa was often the only one who saw the bigger picture. When the people cried out in fear, he stood in faith. When they lost hope, he kept the vision alive. That's what it takes to break cycles, not just inspiration, but consistency. Not just motivation, but reprogramming. He had to speak to them in a way that bypassed their fear and called out their destiny. And he had to do it over and over again, because transformation is not a one-time event. It's a journey. He knew that if he didn't change how they thought, they would never be able to sustain the freedom they had been given. Because the truth is, you can be delivered in a moment, but staying free requires discipline, vision, and a new way of thinking. That is the deeper meaning behind his entire mission. It wasn't just to move them out of Egypt. It was to move Egypt out of them. To pull out the mindset of dependency, of fear, of self, doubt, to replace it with belief, with identity, with responsibility. Because once a person starts to think differently, they begin to act differently. And once they act differently, they begin to shape a new reality. That's how nations are built. That's how legacies are created. Not by changing circumstances alone, but by changing minds first. Hazrat Moosa carried that responsibility with a weight that most would never understand. He wasn't just guiding them to a new land. He was guiding them to a new way of being. One that was rooted not in survival, but in strength. Not in submission to tyranny, but in submission to purpose. And every step forward was a step into a future that demanded a new level of awareness, a new kind of courage, and a mind that was no longer chained to the past.